Welcome everyone. I'm super excited to be hosting this morning with you all. It's a pretty crazy time across the contact center world, and the last couple of weeks it's just changed daily. And talking to a lot of you, I know you've been having a pretty tough time trying to thread everything together and find out how you keep your business going and your people safe. So the reason we want to do this webinar is to try and bring together as many people in this community as we can and try to help you work through solving some of those questions that you've got. I know time is a pretty precious commodity for you, so thank you so much for carving out that time today. We want to hopefully give you lots of good value in that time as well. So yeah, we've got a couple of really special guests that are going to do a lot of the talking today, and I'll kind of guide them through a few questions that I've got that I think are going to help you start to think about what next after you know, probably some of you are still trying to get your technology sorted out, and I totally appreciate that. But there are some really important things to think about after you get your technology sorted out and your people working remotely that, I really urge you not to delay thinking about. So a couple of things. The Agile 11 and the Agile Contact Center have always been remote as a principle. So we feel like we've got a lot of good knowledge and experience on how to make sure that this works. We've also worked with contact center teams who have been remote, who we've helped be remote or have already been remote, and we've worked with them. So we know that this can work, but it does take a little bit of thought to sort of get your head around. And one of the really interesting things for me is that the whole relationship to time and space and how we identify with work is going to change so rapidly. And so it's just a really important time for us to start to think about this stuff. So we're doing this just because we want to make a difference. We're not trying to, generate leads or sales or anything out of this stuff. You're not going to hear from us afterwards trying to get meetings with you. We just want to deliver you some value. So that's what we hope we'll do today. So couple of quick things before we start on the logistics. So the webinar is set up in a way that you can ask questions. So the Q&A, there is a chat function. If you've got questions that you want us to pose to Marcie or Eduardo or for us to answer, please use the Q&A. You can upvote in there too. So when someone posts a question and you really like it, it's something you want to ask, just vote for it and it'll find its way to the top. And that's a really handy way for us to theme up all the questions that you've got. And we'll throw those into the conversation as they become relevant, or we'll save them up to the end and we'll cover them off. We will make sure that any question that you pose today, whether it comes up, whether we get a chance to get it answered here in the webinar or not, we will come back to you with an answer. You may have lots of questions about technology. Marcie's got some good intel on that stuff. We may need to take some of those questions away, but again, we'll commit to coming back to you with answers on everything that you ask us. There will be a survey at the end, really short. Just want to know if this was valuable and what else you'd like to hear from us if we continue to do this on a regular basis, which we're committed to doing. What else? We're recording this, so we'll have the video ready later on today. So if anyone wants to go back and re-watch it, or you want to share it, or those that can't make it will be able to see it, and we'll turn it into a podcast as well. We have a podcast, the Agile Contact Center. Go and check that out as well. And I'm also pulling together a remote ready guide that is almost ready to publish. I think it'll probably be ready Monday. I want to make sure that anything that comes up today, I can weave that in, but we'll make that available free on the website. You can go and download that, and that will just help to get you started on some of the things you need to think about in being remote ready as well. So that's where we are with that stuff. So I think without further ado, I'm going to introduce, let Marcie and Eduardo introduce themselves really, because they'll do a better job than I will. And then once they've done that, we're going to get into why we're here. So we're going to talk about trust and purpose, why that's important, outcomes over outputs. We'll talk about what the difference is between those and why that's important when you're working remotely with your contact centers. Keeping your teams engaged and connected, really, really important. And then technology piece, we'll get into that as well. So Eduardo, Marcie.
Do we want to introduce Martin as well, maybe?
We should actually, yeah, Martin.
I'm just sitting here for the fun of it.
Thank you. Still got my training wheels on. Martine is from the Agile 11, and she has been hosting the webinars that the guys have been running there. You might have seen that as well, and that they've been really cool. So Martine's going to help me manage the Q&A and some of the logistics. So thank you, Martine.
Hi.
I love showing that when you're saying, we might have some answers around technology, and maybe Marcie can provide you some. You didn't say that I can help with technology, yeah? It was only Marcie that can help with technology questions, yeah? Is that right?
It's definitely your strong suit as well, Eduardo.
Maybe I'll start, Marcie, if you like, yeah? And we tell the story on how all this came about. So I'm Eduardo Nofuentes. I'm the founder of the Agile 11, and I was the director as well of the Agile Contact Center until Sean took that baton from me. I'm in my kids' room because it's crazy out there outside one of my kids' room. I can hear the two toddlers running around and my partner trying to do work calls as well. And I imagine most of you will be in the same situation. So bear with me if you see one of the toddlers coming in, which is very likely it's going to happen in the next hour. So as I said, I'm Eduardo Nofuentes. Maybe my story starts back in 2012 when I joined realestate.com.au. That it's a Melbourne-based digital company in the property space as customer experience manager or something like that. That was my title. Part of that title meant that I had to run the contact center there, and I had zero experience running that contact centers. I've never done that before. And they said to me, you'll be okay. So my experience in contact center goes back to 2012. As I said, I didn't have experience, but I knew what I didn't want contact centers to be because I had been a user of many contact centers, and I want to do things differently to the experience that I was receiving. Can you imagine trying to respond to some of the prompts that we get in contact centers, like, tell us in a few words what your call is about with this accent? It never works with my accent. So I knew exactly the things that I didn't want to see in that contact center at REA. So as some of you know, and some of you visited that contact center through the 3 years that I was there, we set up a different way of running a contact center, much more, I would say, human-centric, using some of the agile tools like visualization of work and stand-ups and sprint plannings and things like that, but also measuring different things that most contact centers will measure. We didn't measure the after work calls or the average handle calls, and I'm sure we'll get into that when we talk about outcomes over outputs. But it was a different way to manage a contact center. The results were really great. We had great customer experience or customer satisfaction. We had great employee experience. We were working really well with the business. So I started writing a little bit about that story, and people started coming and seeing. And one of them was Sean and James, who's on the call, and he came as well and brought a few people. So it became a bit of a thing. Then in 2015, I left realestate.com and I started my own company, and the company was called at that point the Agile Contact Center, which then morphed into the Agile 11 in 2016, at the end of 2016. And it was about helping contact centers move to a less traditional way of working, to a less conventional way of managing a contact center. I worked with a couple of clients as I left, and one day in July 2016, I actually have found that email, Marcie. Marcie sends me an email from Canada. So by the way, Marcie is right now in Ottawa in Canada. So it's not Friday for her, it's Thursday afternoon. Is that right, Marcie? Yeah?
Yeah, you got it.
So Marcie sends me an email in July 2016 saying, hey, I'm the head of customer support. I can't remember the exact name, here at Shopify. And I've been reading your materials, and, I'm trying to do something similar at scale, and I can't find anyone in the world that can help me. And I went like, oh shit, an email from Shopify asking them if I can help them. And I asked her, so how many people do you mean when you're talking at scale? I don't know how many you had at the time, but I think it's probably 1,200 at the time. And we're looking at going up to 2,000. So to give you an idea, I had 50 people in my team at realestate.com. So that was a bit of a, of a stretch. And she said to me, oh, and by the way, 95% of my workforce is remote. So do you think we can do the same with my team? And I said, I'm not sure, but I'm here for the challenge. So I'd love to try to help you, see if we can make that happen. So that was back in 2016. Marcie and I have been in contact since then. I've been 3 or 4 times to Canada, to Ottawa, to see the operations that she set up there. I've seen firsthand the growth of Marcie's team and the organization. Shopify is an organization, and I can say it's been amazing. It's been amazing to witness. I would like today not to be about me, but more about Marcie and the Shopify story, because you're going to learn how to take these purpose-led, remote customer service or contact center teams at scale with her. So that's about me. Sean? Someone said there's a bit of noise. Might be me.
Yeah, I think it's sure.
It might be your beard on your microphone.
My beard. There you go. I'm gonna try to hold it this way. Is that better?
That is good.
I think so. Yeah.
Do I have to repeat everything?
I think you're okay.
So over to you, Marcie, to introduce yourself and Shopify and what you've done there.
Sure. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. It's still Thursday evening for me, but I'm really excited to be on a call with all of you tonight. And I'm really, really hoping that you use the Q&A function after. I've heard my own story countless times, so I personally don't need to recount it over and over, but it's really important for me that everybody who's here tonight gets everything that they were hoping to from this session. So please use those functions afterwards. It'd be really helpful. I joined Shopify back in 2012, and for those of you who aren't familiar, Shopify is primarily, well, first and foremost, we are an e-commerce software. So just, sort of behind the scenes of helping entrepreneurs put their stores online. But we are now a multi-channel platform. So we have a point of sale system, we have Shopify payments, Shopify shipping. In North America, we just launched our own fulfillment centers. Still online is our biggest engine, but we integrate with tons of different sales channels like Pinterest, Facebook, Instagram, the whole suite of all the selling that you would possibly want to do on social networks, mobile selling, everything like that. So I won't go into too many details there. But if anybody is sort of saying, hey, is that kind of like Amazon? No, not really. We're not necessarily a marketplace. We're actually the engine behind entrepreneurs and really the small to medium-sized businesses. But for those of you in Melbourne who are tuning in, we do have a small team in Melbourne, which is Shopify Plus, which is our enterprise software. So we do cater to some of the larger companies, and I don't know if like some of the names of those brands might be familiar to you, but if you've ever shopped from, I think Allbirds or Fashion Nova, or I'm trying to think of some other ones that maybe are around there. My favorite Shopify merchant is actually in the Gold Coast, so not terribly far, but Moana Bikini is another great merchant. So we're just sort of the engine behind a lot of these. And so if you've
JB Hi-Fi, I think it's a very well-known brand in Australia that you guys have just helped put the website together. JB Hi-Fi.
Yeah, that was in the last year and a bit, I think. So they're a Shopify Plus merchant. So all that to say, I joined them in 2012 when they were a scrappy little startup of about 100 people. And I joined as a customer support guru, which is what we call our customer support folks. And previous to that, I had my own business for almost 10 years. And I was just, kind of changing it up, I guess. And so there was about 10 people on the support team when I joined. And when you're in a startup, everything is very different. You have to wear multiple hats. And so I led the initiative to grow our team and take Shopify remote for the first time in the company. I think I hired our first remote employee in 2014 at the very beginning of the year. And then from there, as Eduardo said, I think I contacted them in around 2016. We had just over 1,000 people. And I think at the beginning of the year, the last time we looked at it, there was just over 2,000 people in the support team, and they were all pretty much working from home. We'll get into some of the details of how we actually set that up as we go, I think, but that's, I think, the story a bit in a nutshell.
Awesome. Cool. Well, let's get into it then. Thank you both for your backgrounds. I think that's really relevant to kind of show the experience you've had with setting these remote teams up and making it work. So a couple of things that I've been asked about a lot about, how do you, once your teams are remote, managing them and driving that accountability and productivity and those kind of things. And for me, that comes from trust and purpose. So I'd love for you guys to talk to us about how do you build that and foster that environment where there is that strong sense of trust, and the importance of purpose in doing that for remote teams. Marcie, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I think, over the course of figuring out how to actually build a support team, let alone a remote one, it became really evident to me that there was like common practices. I had joined the Ontario Contact Center Association or something like that, and it was really extremely formulaic. It was like, these are the things that you measure. It's handle time, it's wrap up time. Companies would argue about whether or not handle time included wrap up time. I don't know. You would look at things like your total contact volume and all sorts of what would perceivably be called as KPIs. So, and I understand that those all made sense for, understanding how the business was actually functioning. To me, they were always just really strong indicators of influencing your capacity plan so that you could properly hire. But it never really struck me as the thing that the employee should necessarily be responsible for, because the most important thing from a customer service perspective is that the person is responsible for that the customer's relationship to your brand. They are through and through the advocate and the voice and sometimes the face of the brand of your company. And so I always really wanted to make sure that the people on my team felt that was their biggest responsibility. I used to say, like the Spider-Man quote, with great power comes great responsibility. And the last thing I really wanted them to be doing was having like all of these other business metrics and capacity metrics floating around in the back of their head, assuming that meant success. And also, I was responsible for talking to our executive team around how we were doing every month. And, when I would talk to them about the business, I would have to make sure that everything was kind of on track as we'd promised from an operational standpoint. But what really mattered was, is the money that we're spending actually getting us the value that we are intending? And all of that value was elicited from the conversations that the folks on the front line were actually having with our customers. And so we wanted to know things like, how are they impacting the sustainability of their business? So were they able to make another sale after they talked to somebody in our team? Or what was the value of the conversation from a CSAT standpoint? But those were the types of things that really mattered to our business, because that's what we were essentially making a conscious choice to actually invest in, investing in those conversations. So I don't know if that totally answers your question, Sean, but I think you were kind of wanting it to come back to purpose and trust. Mm-hmm. It was always really important for me that we shared our strategic objectives all the way down the line. And that's where I sort of say purpose is, I would totally agree with what you had said, Sean. Purpose is like the most important thing. You would never want to have somebody on the front line say, ask them, what does success mean? And they say, oh, it's a 12-minute handle time and an 89 to 92% CSAT rating. But then you have somebody at like the, a higher level of leadership say, oh, success means that our customers have, they contact us again, or they don't contact us again, or, the discrepancy in what your actual goals are in the company. So purpose is really important for me, in that our employees were able to articulate exactly what the goals were for this team, like what their actual existence was meant to do. And when we talk about trust is a funny thing, I find. When I've talked to a lot of different companies who were like, yes, we do remote. And I always wanted to learn from other people, especially like, we have 10,000 people and we're working remote. And then I would get into the conversation and they're like, yeah, we work remote like one day a month if you're on good standing. And I'm like, that's definitely not working remote. That's nowhere even close working remote. You don't have the luxury of being suspicious of people when you're working remote. And I don't think that you should be suspicious of people in general, but that's, it's a different probably webinar. But you have to start with trust, and you have to believe that the people that you've hired are there to do the right thing. And that's why purpose is even more important, because your trust will also be affirmed when you're able to make those connections even stronger from everybody on the front line all the way up to your strategic leadership level, and your trust is actually built. At Shopify, we use the trust battery as a metaphor, and I think it's one that everybody can probably really understand. It's around charging it and depleting it, and how do you actually charge it so that it's full, and how do you keep it full, and what are those types of activities. And I would I often reflect on my own relationships and say, like, what charges it, what depletes it, and having to micromanage and see every purview into every detail that especially can be appealing in customer service type roles. It doesn't get you very far, I don't think.
Agree. Yeah, I think that transition from in that leadership style from potentially more of a people who like to have more control when you can see all of your people in front of you, to them all being remote and not having that constant contact and being able to look over people's shoulders. I think that will be a tricky transition for a lot of leaders and team leaders to make. And I'm not saying they're bad leaders. It's just stylistic. I have been like that as well. So, Eduardo, what tips or what would you say to leaders who are trying to make that transition and are feeling uncomfortable about, not having as much contact and FaceTime and being able to see into, that really close quarters with their teams every day? How do they move to being more trusting?
Before I answer that question, I'll add one thing to what Marcie was saying. So I've been in Ottawa and Shopify, and Shopify as an organization is a purpose-led organization. So Shopify's purpose is make commerce better for everyone. Is that right? Make commerce better for everyone. And when you come into the offices, because they've got really cool offices, even 95% of the people work remote, they still have really cool offices. They've got a neon sign that says make commerce better for everyone. I'm sure we can find a photo. Maybe Martin can find
internet, probably.
Maybe Martin can find a photo. We can show it. And I remember being in the kickoff conference on 2017, and the CEO Toby Luque came out on stage, and the first slide that he put on in front of the 2,000 employees that the company had at the point is the three key priorities for Shopify. Number one, build product to make commerce better. Build great products to make commerce better for everyone. Number two, make money so we can make more products. Number three, never reverse 1 and 2. So you probably can hear my toddlers now in the background. Can you? Yeah. So that's a really good example of a company that puts purpose before profit, starting from the CEO. So it's much easier if you work in an organization like that to then, work with your teams. They said we're a purpose-led team here, not an outcomes or not an outputs team, based team. So your question was, how can you transition from a leadership? I think is the chicken and egg question. We see that a lot, not just in the contact centers, but in the work that we do with other organizations. Sean, I'll say the same to the leaders. Just start trusting. I see that when you start applying this way of leading, this way of working, the team is going to respond much better. Sometimes it's our own fears as leaders that's stopping us from doing that. But if maybe this situation, as strange as it's, that's the photo of the Shopify office. Thank you, Martin. That's what you see when you come in. Thank you. So start by trusting. Don't wait. Don't do the chicken or egg. You are the chicken, whatever comes first. Show that you're going to trust them, and you'll see how the teams, 99% of people, you will respond really well.
Excellent. I think the other thing too that I would share is find, if you don't have a purpose for your team, then create one. And I think it's really important for every team to have a strong sense of why they exist. And we will share some stuff in the guide on how you can do that with your team. It's not as hard as what you might think it is, but the hard part is bringing that purpose to life. And so as a leader, I would say find examples, like constantly have your radar on and finding those examples where people are bringing that purpose to life, and share those stories with your team. And don't do it over email, or like talk to them about it like this. Get them on a Zoom call and talk about those examples and elevate people up and make role models out of them. And people will then connect, like that social connection of, oh yeah, Eduardo did this. I can see how his role made the purpose come to life. And that starts to then create that positive momentum. And as a leader, then you feel like that leap of faith to trust people is not so hard, because you're finding these stories. So I would start there too.
Cool. A question in there, if now might be a good time to answer it. It's from Hazel. And Marcie, this might be a good one for you. How do you typically...
Martine's frozen.
Software.
We lost you there for a little.
Okay. Sorry.
Read that again. Thank you.
So how do we typically set up working from home for the contact center staff? Is it via remote access for staff through the work PC, or is there a functionality in a software that you're using?
It depends on what your channel offerings actually are. So all of ours are browser based. In fact, you could probably, I think ours would actually function even on like just a Chrome browser. So there's nothing that's hardwired to the desktop. Everything is cloud based. We use Zendesk for email, and also the sort of the skin of the rest of our interactive system. And then we've built our phone and chat technology on something called Twilio Flex. Twilio is a product that's been around in the contact center industry for a very long time, and their newest product, which is Twilio Flex, allows you to custom build both your telephony and your chat tools on top of it. For our social care, we use, oh my gosh, it's just totally escaping me now. It starts with a C. Conversocial. And Lithium for our forums. So everything for us, you'd be able to actually do directly from, it's all browser based.
Cool. And we'll, I'll pull out all these references to the tech or anything else that comes up, and we'll put that in some show notes for the video at the end for anyone who's kind of, trying to write it down and might have missed it. Cool. So next question, outcomes over outputs. We do talk about that a lot with teams, whether they're remote or not. And I think it's really important when you've got remote teams. So yeah, Marcie or Eduardo, do you want to talk about, what's for you, what is the difference between an outcome and an output when you're looking at what success, how you measure success, and maybe some examples of the kinds of things that you do think we should be measuring in contact centers when they're remote?
I can start if you'd like. I can only really speak from, I guess, my own experience in the one contact center, but one thing that I do think is also apparent when you are in touch with other customer service is where their goals are actually orienting from. So outcomes, I think, are largely geared towards being very explicit about how your customer is going to receive that experience and what are the values and the principles that you would hope that they would display within that interaction. And so, or do you want them to be fast, concise, and relevant, or do you want them to be, do you want them to build a relationship, leave them with a memory? And like, it just depends on your industry and what your goals of your company actually are. So I think if you're able to build those into like really tangible, they could be like your values, they could be your quality score, they could be however it works for you necessarily. But I think that your outcomes actually need to be relative to how your customer service person is impacting the relationship of the customer they're connecting with. I'll just sort of stop there.
Yeah, I agree. I think I would recommend always to just focus on the high level outcomes, which is, to me, is customer satisfaction first. How satisfied your customers are with the service you're providing. To the employee satisfaction, how satisfied your employees are in working where they are, because if they're not, that's going to be a leading indicator that your customer satisfaction is going to be bad as well. And then what I did at Real Estate and what we've done with some of our clients is helping them focus on different type of metrics. So one of the things we did at realestate.com was to focus on the what we call the failure demand calls, so the calls that we don't want to receive, rather than the average handle time. So at that time, I can't remember the figures, but let's imagine we were receiving 1,000 calls every day, 1,000 contacts by email. We're starting to identify that probably 60% of those calls were calls that the customer didn't want to make. Doesn't matter how well we treat them, they don't want to make them in the first place. So we started focusing on removing those calls by working, one, internally, some of them we can fix ourselves in the contact center, or two, work with the business. So I remember, at the time, people still had to call us to change the password, for example. So that's a call they don't want to make. So we talk to the tech team, say, hey, it'd be great if we can add this functionality so they can reset the passwords themselves. I'm just putting a very simple example. So it's changing the mindset of your teams, not to manage calls, but to manage customers, not to manage contacts, but to manage customers and their interactions with you. That to me is, one of the biggest shifts that you can do around outcomes over outputs.
And that's also made me think of shared accountability. So that's one of the really important sort of traits or principles of distributed teams and self-organizing teams. So do you guys have any views on that for remote teams? Are there some really good shared, would you say, have shared KPIs or shared responsibilities? And are there any really good metrics around that you would have for contact centers?
We've talked a lot about this one, Marcie, the share KPIs or individuals, or you can share your experience on Shopify, and I'll share later.
Hazel's actually also added a question related to this. So what are ways that a manager can monitor performance working remotely? So metrics, etc. How do you do that remotely?
I'll leave Marcie, and then I could add probably to it.
I'm a really huge proponent for team-based metrics and not individual metrics. I think that, people are going, and this also I think is really quite helpful for remote as well. If there's shared accountability and, sort of shared winning, there's this even stronger sense of team that can be even more critical for a remote team. Essentially what you get then is a team of individuals who rely and they try and make each other successful, rather than a bunch of individuals that have a one-to-one relationship with their lead. They just happen to be on the same team. And so, there's a lot of things that people say is really unfair about that too, because you can get the person who just sort of skates by and doesn't pull their weight, or you can get the person that sort of carries the torch for everybody on that team. I think even more so when you notice that type of discrepancy within a team, it actually means that you are noticing as a lead, you are noticing the right things right then and there. And you don't actually need to evaluate individuals on an individual basis, because if you are able to identify who are the ones who are sort of low core or high performers, you'll be able to go from there. But more practically speaking, I think if you need to have individual metrics just to sort of get yourself into a place of becoming comfortable with more team-based metrics, I think evaluating their quality or their alignment to the purpose on an individual basis can be really helpful. I think, you can take them, I don't know what all of the complexities of your businesses are, or, at Shopify, our gurus would handle everything from password resets up to how do I access the API? So it was a very vast breadth of questions. And so it didn't really make sense for us to do anything regarding handle times or anything like that, because it could go from 7 minutes to 35 minutes, depending on the actual call. So I think, evaluating someone's alignment to it, Now, then you're probably saying, like, okay, but like, how do I actually evaluate that sort of alignment? What I found worked for me at various points in the career wasn't always the same. I found the way that I was able to evaluate kind of changed every 18 months or so, because the whole nature of like how your team actually behaves ends up changing and evolving as they become more comfortable in understanding, you know, the purpose and how to work together as a team. So I think there's nothing wrong with making changes, you know, every 12 to 18 months sort of thing. But again, practically speaking, I think you can do like live coaching. I'm a huge fan of that. So you are a lead, spend time with your team, do live coaching, give them feedback in the moment. I know some folks that worked on my team, like they really wanted to do like a calibration in the actual moment. So some leads would say, oh, I want to do individual, but we're going to agree on the score together. Cool. Like that was kind of up to them. But some people did a combination of live and retroactive. Some people did all live. But what you're trying to achieve is trust in your leads, that they have a really good understanding about the folks on their team and how aligned their teams actually are to the purpose and the goals.
Fantastic.
I 100% agree with that, as you can imagine. We've talked a lot about this. Yeah, like you can't say that you, as a leader, you can't say, you know, we want collaboration and we want to be all together, and then set individuals KPIs, because people are going to read, you know, you're telling me you want us to work together, but you're going to sort of, you know, assess me on what I'm doing individually. So that's another thing that takes some courage to say, no, we're all in this together. We're going to look at, you know, the outcome types metrics, and we're going to all see how they're going. I agree with Marcie. We did exactly that at Real Estate. So we had the sort of team metrics, which were the high metrics, number of calls or failure calls, customer satisfaction, employee experience, all those. And then initially we knew that one way of reducing calls coming in was that we could control was through the quality. If one of the agents provide the wrong information, that's going to provide another call coming in, which is what we don't want. So we started measuring the quality of the people through, you know, the calibration, the coaching. When the customer satisfaction and the quality started to improving after 6-8 months, we stopped that. And we sort of had the conversation more around values. How do you bring yourself? How do you show your values individually? So you can assess is not the right word, individually through values, rather than through numbers or your typical KPIs. Can I ask you, Sean, because I don't think we've covered that. It's very interesting the way Shopify does the teaming. So when I first came in there was a lot of books around one book called Team of Teams. And a lot of the leads there were reading that book, Team of Teams, which comes from a guy, I think is a guy that from the US Army that wrote it, you know, and it's how you can.
Stanley McChrystal, I think.
That's right, General McChrystal. Yeah. How can you have this sense of a small team where you're doing a scale of 2,000 people? So can you talk maybe, Marcie, I know you're asking the question, but I think that's very interesting, how you do your remote hubs, you know, how you do it in Ireland, then in New Zealand, and how then you split your teams so there is a connection between everyone from you to the top to the front line.
Yeah. So once upon a time we sort of had just distributed teams, and people could work various hours throughout the day. That was if you were on a team though, you would work like the same fixed hours as everybody. So there's, you know, you always worked with your lead as well. Well, I think it was a couple of years ago that we tried to actually rearrange the teams to be co-located, even though they were still remote. I wouldn't have been able to do this years prior because I didn't have enough people to actually load balance all of my capacity, but also co-locate them. So once the team became big enough, it was something that I was actually able to do, and I was working towards doing for like the better part of a year and a half. But the nice part is even though everybody was working from home, I know it's different times now because everybody's kind of staying a little bit more insular, but you know, folks could kind of get together and they could get together and they would meet up at a local coffee shop. So even though they were working from home, they still had a sense of community based on where they were working. One of my favorite things that I remember, I had hired a team or started up a team in Ireland over 5 years ago. That was sort of the first international hub. And we went to Galway, and I went back after having set it up. There was maybe a year and a half later, and I was walking through with my hoodie on, and I went to a coffee shop, and somebody else had a Shopify backpack on, and they're like, "Hey, you work for Shopify?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm visiting from Canada." And they're like, "Oh, wait a minute, I've heard," like, somebody I'd never met before, but because we were in the same proximity and in the same area, it was sort of these moments that create a sense of community, even though you're working from home. I think that those, we've been talking about it, the situation right now where everybody is sort of not able to have a lot of those community moments. I still think it makes a huge difference to be working with people who can relate to what's going on in your current community right now. So everything from the weather to the grocery supply to the local news or promotions that are happening, all of those things. I think it makes a huge difference, especially when you're working from home, to be able to relate to other people. It really contributes to your sense of belonging and your sense of community, even though it is quite virtual.
We do have
so keeping those teams.
Sorry, we do have a question in there from Grant about how do we make sure people aren't feeling isolated when we are working remotely? Are there any activities or engagement that you can do remotely when we maybe can't see each other face to face?
Yeah, for sure. I think as a leader, it's important to actually initiate a lot of those things, but the even more important, and this goes back to, leading with trust. If you get to a point where your team is looking to you for all the answers around how to engage, it means you haven't enabled them enough to sort of self-organize and create these your own initiatives. So I started actually a new chapter in my Shopify journey, which we don't even need to talk about, but my new team, they're just getting comfortable with remote now. So next week I booked time, 30 minutes with each Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday. I don't know if it matters, but we have Tuesday tea time. We have Wednesday whiskey wind down and fun Friday festivities. So Friday morning we have breakfast together and everybody's got to dress up. It's something ridiculous. Wednesday you can sort of pick your poison and we'll wrap up the day together. And then on Tuesday afternoon we have tea. So one of the things I'm trying to do too is like pick different times of the day that are more accommodating for everybody. And I'm really conscious that you don't want it to become a culture of only breakfast or only lunches together, only, end of the workday drinks kind of thing. So trying to accommodate those various things.
I would like what we did when we were at realestate.com all in the same. We had, stand-ups, and every shift that started will have stand-ups, and be groups of 10 people and say, hey, what happened yesterday? How many emails do we have on the queue? How many calls? Has anything broken? So we had 3 or 4 stand-ups through the day, and everyone will start with that, getting together face to face. You can do that remotely, and Shopify has done that remotely. I think you call them squads there, a group of 10 gurus, is that right, Marcie? And then a group of squads will make a tribe, and they all have different, and they use Zoom, they use video conferencing to have that start of the day. So that's how you can build community as well.
I totally forgot about that.
No.
I totally forgot about it. We did it at the first 10 minutes of everybody's shift. So just because of the way that we had shifts sort of scheduled with overlaps with people coming online and offline for live channels. So we did it for the first 10 minutes 3 times a week. But that was the other thing too. I think there's so many different tactics. What I liked about the stand-ups is they're really rallying around the purpose and the work and knowing what their objectives are. And I think that's great for being really oriented towards the goals. But it is true that when you have a remote team, similar to the question that you asked on behalf of the participant, Martine, like you actually have to consciously create the social culture of your work environment and like attempt to recreate it online.
Yeah, that's a great point. And there's some tools that we use and that they're not that everyone uses, like things like Slack, Zoom that we're using today. Slack is a great chat tool. You can create discussion boards in there. It's a great way to those three really cool ideas you spoke about, Marcie, and how you're bringing your teams together. You can create channels around some of that fun stuff as well. I know not everyone, especially financial services, you've got some limitations over the types of tools that you can use, but even something simple like WhatsApp, even if you just move remote, like WhatsApp is a great way to keep your teams connected in a way that's a bit more secure. So there's a lot of things you can do there. We might just go straight back into the Q&A now, because the other questions I had are going to relate to this as well. So one of the questions that's been upvoted is, once we shift from office to remote, what underwater rocks should we be ready for? Can you share 2 examples of what becomes different as the call center starts operating remotely?
I don't know what you mean by underwater rocks.
So I think that means just things you can't see that you could run.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So you don't know they're there, but you're gonna crash into them. So are there a couple of things that you could say, hey, these are definitely the two key things you should be thinking about?
What's coming from mind, Marcie, is that, and I think you experienced this. Some people, I remember talking about this with you and your team back in Canada. Some people might think they're ready to do this. They're ready to be remote, but when they start doing it, they find they're not. And now we're finding in a very strange circumstances that we're all going to have to. But I remember you talking, that some might not be for everyone. And they start finding themselves, for example, like problems at home, like they don't have the right space, or they don't have the right environment at home to be able to do this work properly. So if you want to expand on that, Marcie, I think we talked about it quite a bit while I was there, that it wasn't for everyone. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I had that luxury at the time, right, to be able to build a remote team where the employees were choosing to join a remote team. I think that's a different situation than everybody's probably kind of facing right now, where we don't really have much choice in the matter. I do think that it's super important for everybody to be really open and curious and patient with that type of transition for everybody. But yeah, it's like remote isn't for everybody, and even for folks that it does work for them, like it can be very isolating still, one way or the other. But that to me I don't know if that's really like the rock under the water, because I think like that's what I hear a lot. I think the thing that's kind of under the water is that so like very rudimentary is your infrastructure, like your telco infrastructure is critical. And I think like, making sure that your employees have the tools that make them really effective will make the world of difference. And I think like for the first couple of weeks, you can probably get away with a laptop sitting on your couch, but it's not sustainable long term. So, investing, which is expensive, investing in your employee experience working from home, so that they have the right technology infrastructure. I don't know if you can affect the broadband necessarily, but from the right tools and equipment to set up from home, it's very important. I'm trying to think of some more of those ones that are.
I'll tell you another one which I found with even our team this last week. So the Agile 11 team last week, they all running at 100 miles an hour because we're all remote. We're putting a lot, series of webinars. So it can lead actually to work too much when you work in this environment and don't pace yourself. So you might be, it's counterintuitive, right? You're going to think that because they're home, they can hide. It's actually the opposite. People, I find, they want to do well, and they will take more things, and they will forget to have lunch, and they will forget to have breaks, and then it's 10 o'clock and they all burn out. Yes, Martin?
Yes.
I'm pretty tired.
I think that's a like a whole another hour's worth of conversation, the whole relationship to that time and space, and how that almost a new dimension is emerging and is going to emerge. There's one I just wanted to pose here. How do you handle onboarding and induction remotely? Because this is going to get very real for contact centers soon, especially those teams that do big volume recruiting.
That's for you, Marcie.
Yeah, Marcie, how do you do that at scale?
Yeah, so we have a team of onboarders and trainers, and essentially with our customer support folks, they start, so we have a start date every 2 weeks for them when they were coming on board, and they would always have, depending on their time zone, they would actually train together for about 4 weeks. And so this hiring class would be working together. And then our onboarders actually split up their time throughout the day. So it is all online, like all of the coursework is actually online, but they've set up each day so that they come in, they connect together, they start the day off with a video call. Nobody starts out the day just on their own login path and completing online courses. So they have multiple checkpoints throughout the day as well. So they've broken down a lot of our training modules into smaller pieces than you would probably do in an in-person classroom, because those touch points throughout the day are extremely important. So they always have a Slack group going, if anybody uses Slack or whatever your sort of company chat tool is. They always have a group for each of the onboarding, and then they always have a Zoom link for their meetings always. So it's always the same link for the entire team, like for their whole 4 weeks. And then we, yeah, so it's all e-learning, but it's broken up with like various touch points throughout the day. So it's not just like do it and then do the quiz and then move on. That, and we do various intros every day of with a different person from a different team, so that when you're remote, you can get to know folks from a different team. So depending on what your contact center actually has, like if there's a separate billing team, or if there's a separate escalation team for something else, or sales, like bringing in different leaders from some of those various teams to do like an intro session with the new hires really breaks up the day, and just make sure that whatever people you bring in to do those calls, that you leave at least a third of the time for the new employees to ask them questions.
Awesome. Question about customer privacy. How do we manage that remotely?
I think it's different for everybody, depending on what your customer service folks actually have access to. So ours is all, like I said, it's all online, but they wouldn't, we wouldn't necessarily let anybody do, well, no, everybody's working from their home, but if you're on chats or emails, like sometimes it's okay to work from like someone else's place, but when you're on the phone, it has to be a pretty quiet spot. So I'm not really sure, like, if they're asking around like screen privacy around customer data or access to it. So with us, that's like a trust and security. We can always see when somebody has logged into another person's shop, and those types of triggers and everything are monitored, but that's just for logins and stuff.
Yeah, I think that's quite a big question. I think it's probably from someone in financial services maybe, but I think it would be the phone conversation. Who else in the house is hearing that? It's probably the screens, it's probably data. I don't think there's a real short answer to that one. I think that's going to be people working through that one.
Yeah, if this person is from fintech and they want to talk a little bit more about it, we can, because we don't, we deal with them through Shopify payments and stuff like that. So we still support that.
Yeah. We might finish with one last question, then I'll wrap things up. I'm conscious of everyone's time, but what was your biggest challenge moving remote?
Probably until the day that I left, it was still simply convincing everybody that it was like you can trust people to work from their homes, and that your engagement will still be high and your productivity will still be great. So and we kept all of those metrics very true. So yeah.
Shopify, your team engagement was in the 90 percentile, I think, when I started. So I imagine they'll still be around there. So the employee engagement in Marcie's teams of 2,000 people remotely is in the 90th percentile. So you can do it.
You can, yeah. I think there's so many things about this new world of remote working that are going to just completely blow the paradigms that people have about, things like engagement. So yeah, it's a really exciting time. I know it's tough, but I think we're moving into a really exciting time for work, what work means for people. I'm going to wrap it up there. I know there's some questions that we didn't answer. We will answer all of those. If anyone who has asked those questions wants to have a phone chat, happy to do that. So I'll give you that option to do that. But we will, as I said, we've recorded this. We'll turn it into a podcast, but we'll get the video up today so that you can go back and trawl through it and have a listen. I'll pull out some of the key parts to it as well. And as I said, I am putting together a guide. So it's going to cover leadership. It's going to cover ways of working. It's going to cover the technology piece. There'll be 4 or 5 key things, but that will get into a lot more detail, like how to keep your teams connected, some of the tools that we talked about, like Slack and Zoom, and how you make all of that work. And purpose, how to create a purpose for your team. So that'll be available. Again, if you want to chat, you want to talk about any of this stuff in more detail, please reach out. There will be a survey at the end. Hope you share your thoughts on that. One question is, what else do you want to hear from us on? And we can keep bringing stuff to you for as long as we need to, so that we can help you out. We're genuinely committed to trying to help the industry get through this challenging time. So please let us know, and we'll either bring it from the Agile Contact Center, or we'll find the right people in the industry to have a conversation and get that information to you in some way. So that's it from me. Thank you so much for everyone for coming along. Thank you, Marcie, from all the way from Canada.
Can we show the love for Marcie on the chat? Maybe some shout outs on the chat. It's not 8:30 probably. Did you put your kids to bed or not? They're still running around.
I think they're watching Jumanji too.
show your love to Marcie. Put something for her in the chat.
Yeah.
It's great. It's really great to have her. Like, as I said, I've seen this since 2016, and hopefully, in times like the times that we're living right now, it's just about some connection sometimes, and hopefully this hour has given you some hope. Yeah. We were thinking about doing this next week rather than on Friday, and I think it was you, Sean, and said, no, let's do it on Friday. People have a lot of uncertainty, so let's try to fight that uncertainty with education and telling stories that is possible. So you today heard a story that you can take your teams remotely, even if it's 2,000 people and 3 or 4 continents that you have them right now, Marcie, yeah? So there is hope. We're on this together. We can do it. So yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, thanks, Marcie. Thanks, Martine.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for having me.
Bye, everybody.
Have a great one. Bye-bye.